You're gonna not believe this one. Forbes says Baldur's Gate 3 is bad. Unbelievable.
All right, so recently Forbes put out an article that's warning players about Baldur's Gate 3. And before I get into it, while on the surface what they talk about is true, what they allude to is completely dishonest.
This is obviously to be expected. Because make no mistake, the modern day Forbes is the equivalent of a celebrity gossip page.
And I only just recently got into making videos like this, where I talk about articles or tweets or discussions, and I try to add another perspective because,
that's cool.
To be honest with you,
good for you.
I have a lot of fun doing it. I've talked about it in the past. I work a full-time job, so my more intricate, longer videos take longer to make.
Okay.
Stuff like this is much easier for me just to riff an opinion off of something else that somebody else already put up. But
well now, ain't this the perfect match made in heaven, my dude?
It's also nice because I actually get to add some nuance that's missing from these discussions, because often these people are...
And I get to add even better nuance.
...looking at something from their perspective only and nothing else. And it leaves a lot of holes that need to get filled.
True.
And I'm going to fill them holes.
Okay.
Opinions are an odd thing, because they're always based off of our personal experiences and the things that we've seen ourselves. So as such, they...
That's true, but that doesn't mean that one opinion cannot be better than a different opinion.
...tend to be a little bit, well, hyperbolic. I mean, my opinion is much more valuable than yours because I was the one that experienced it, so therefore it's a truth to me. But we know that's not necessarily the case. No opinion...
I mean, it makes... I think everyone understands what you mean. You're fine.
Opinion is ever more valuable than another, unless it's actually truth, and then it's no longer an opinion. See, and that's the funny thing about journalism, because today, especially, journalists often will post articles and they'll speak in what they believe to be objective truths, but it's actually just their experiences.
Oh, yeah. And everything gets labeled as an opinion piece, even when they're trying to state a, fact. They're just still going to call it an opinion piece, because that's just the best line of protection.
With, well, a video game in this case. And they completely ignore a lot of the nuances around the discussion that they're having.
Mm-hmm.
Which normally isn't that big of a deal because you're reading an opinion piece, but when you're aiming it towards potential consumers, that's when it's a problem. That's what I want to talk to you guys about today. The article is titled 2 Warnings About Baldur's Gate 3's Review Scores. The article reads, Baldur's Gate 3 has taken the world by storm, with over 800,000 concurrent players on Steam its launch weekend and the highest aggregate score on Metacritic of any game this year. Though that has dipped slightly.
Absolutely 100% deserved also.
As more reviews have come in, bringing it in line with Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom. Both games have a 96 on Metacritic right now, as Larian's RPG has been taken down a notch. And both are tremendous video games in their own right, but
It's literally Zelda players probably, by the way, doing that. Yeah, Zelda players are the problem. They don't care about is something actually... Like, Tears of the Kingdom is so overrated. It's a 99.9% world full of nothing. Unless you make a penis rocket, you have nothing to do in there.
I must offer up 2 warnings to gamers, whether you're playing already or thinking about buying Baldur's Gate 3. 1. There are no plans for expansions. This is the lesser of the 2 warnings, but it is kind of worth mentioning. Baldur's Gate 3 is one of those games that you really get lost in and don't want to end. So it's a shame that Larian Studios has no plans to release DLC or expansions. The trouble is partly due...
That's interesting, because this is, by the way, super fresh off the presses. Today, we had actual news that there was cut content, unfinished things that the developers felt were not good enough in the game. And they just removed them. Whole chunks of storylines, places, and a lot of things like that. So, I'm kind of wondering, maybe they actually, do put that maybe into the game. Who knows? Because the reality is, do you think really people will get mad if they actually do make an expansion? I don't think people will honestly be mad. Because when a game is just good enough, people don't care about the microtransactions, people don't care about the paid DLCs, people don't care about pay to win. As long as a game is good enough, we forgive things. Because let's face it, Baldur's Gate actually has some serious bugs. A lot of them were fixed, and, you know, most game-breaking stuff was patched like pretty much day one, but still, it has bugs, it has some issues. But no one cares about that because the game overall is just so unbelievable.
Due to the high-level adventuring in D&D, which means you'll be capped at level 12 and stuck replaying the game as it is, rather than ever moving on to new content. This could change, of course, but it definitely feels limiting. I'm sorry, you think this is something that's worth warning players about?
No,
a game
obviously.
That, for most casual players, they're going to be in the first act for up to 50 hours. For most casual players, aren't going to complete for anywhere from 100 to 140 hours. The game is too...
Most players probably play like 3 hours and they think it's great, but they don't keep playing.
Too good, guys. So I probably wouldn't play it because, you know, there's not going to be anything after it comes out. So if you don't like being let down, I probably just wouldn't play this Baldur's Gate 3. This incredible game. Yeah, I'll just hold off, honestly. And the funny thing is, when we're talking about like whether or not there's going to be any future content, what does it matter? Look at the replay value that's already available in the game.
Yep.
All the different permutations of different choices that you can make, different plays you can have, whether it's Dark Urge, whether it's playing evil, whether it's playing good, where it's playing a mix of the two, romancing different characters, whatever it might be. Playing the game multiplayer, that adds a completely different dimension to your playthrough. There's all kinds of different ways to play this game. There's not just one playthrough and then done. Well, I realize that there's a lot of players that will play the game like that. That's also not a reason to warn players because there's not going to be any future content. And that's not anything you actually can even say for certain anyway. So alluding to it makes it seem like, well, players shouldn't even really give it a shot because, well, you know, after you play it, you're going to really enjoy it, but then it's just going to let you down afterwards.
He has a point. That's a horrible argument to make.
You know, I already have another video planned that kind of revolves around this topic that I'm slowly but surely working on. It'll come. I promise. It'll come. But we don't know the future of Baldur's Gate 3, specifically because this game has performed well outside of the expectations of Larian Studios. For all we know, they could be looking at adding future content to the game.
The Larian expected 100k player stops in the first day of release. Well, expectations were shattered, and no one expected how well this went. And mostly because of the panic of the AAA and all of the stupidity that they themselves created around this, saying, "Oh no, our game cannot be as good as that thing." Obviously, that's going to create a lot of attention.
However, you also have to keep in mind this is the company that put on their website that they don't believe in microtransactions and they believe in giving you a complete game experience from the initial purchase. DLC and expansions, that still falls under a microtransaction, whether you believe...
Does it actually? I did not know. I completely consider DLCs not microtransactions. Wow. I wonder if that's actually... Is that true? Because I never looked at a DLC as a microtransaction. I mean, sure, there are some DLCs that you would call, like, kind of almost if they're super bad, but, you know.
Believe it or not, it does.
That's
and the
crazy.
thing is that if you look at their other games, they never made expansions for those either. However, they
true.
did make a definitive edition. And that's something that we can talk about. Larian Studios released the definitive edition of Divinity Original Sin 2 about a year after the game's release, building upon the original game with a ton of different enhancements. Graphics and performance received an upgrade. The update also introduced new story content, dialogue, voice acting, quests, UI improvements, and some changes to the game's balancing, enriching the overall experience for the player. Furthermore, all of this content was free to players that had already purchased the game. I would expect something similar for Baldur's Gate 3. Now, of course, this isn't to say that there's no way there will be any future content for the game. Because as much as Larian Studios will say that they never planned to make any future content, they also didn't plan for the game to be nearly as successful as it is today.
True. True.
The thing is, too, is if you want more Baldur's Gate, go play Divinity Original Sin 2. It's based off of the same engine, same kind of mechanics, same kind of humor. It's all there. You'll enjoy it. It's also...
I mean, people... Larion... I don't understand... This is... The stupidest thing about this is probably the fact that, well, Larion is constantly saying how much they care about the player experience and blah, blah, blah. So, if enough people legitimately ask for an expansion, they will probably make it. Because if they care about the player's experiences, then they're probably going to make an expansion. Because if people want it. People obviously will want an expansion to Baldur's Gate.
One of the highest rated games of all time as well. It's also something that's critically acclaimed and something that a lot of CRPG players love.
Mm-hmm.
We gotta keep from trying to make every single game the last game or the only game that we'll ever play, where we just want them to put more and more content into the game, because I feel like this is something that gave birth to live service games. And that experience just loses.
Oh, that's actually a good point. Oh no. Oh no. Did we ruin gaming? I mean, you already ruined gaming by saying, oh, gaming companies need to make money. A company needs... They're already making enough money. Relax. They don't need 50 microtransactions to make more money. They're already making all the money. So gamers already ruined that by giving, you know, stupid companies a way out just by saying, oh, they need to make money. Did we ourselves push into microtransactions and infinity progression and all of that garbage with wanting to play a game forever? Wow. Maybe.
Its value over time, because the more and more content comes out, it's like TV shows when they get to their 8th or 9th season, where you're just like, okay, it's not even the same show anymore. I don't even know these characters.
You're kidding me? The Walking Dead collapsed after pretty much like season 4 or something, or season 3. Bruh, I watched that show until the last episode, and you know what? It was beautiful. Stealth zombies teleporting everywhere. Nothing makes sense. The story pretty much for the last 3 seasons was non-stop. Okay, this is generic bad guy. He's bad because he's bad. And we can't actually figure out the story that we're going to tell. So here's random MacGuffins that happen in the first part of the season. Middle season, same random MacGuffins. You know, the end of the season, last 2 episodes, well, now we need to tie all of this together. And what happens? Like clockwork, everyone comes together, and then in the time span of like 5 minutes, they heroically just completely annihilate the enemies because of reasons. Mwah, it's beautiful. It was the greatest thing ever. Hate watching The Walking Dead, 0 regrets out of 10.
It's just watered down. Just enjoy the first experience of playing Baldur's Gate 3. Just like you did with the first few Halo games. Or the Mass Effect series. Or Dragon Age Origins. Or Super Mario Brothers. Maybe your first Final Fantasy game. There's nothing that's ever going to be there that's going to capture the magic of your first experience playing a game. So constantly just asking for more content can sometimes lead to... well, a less enjoyable experience.
Okay.
The article continues on. 2. Act 3 is a total mess. Don't take my word for it. Gamers are having major issues with the game's final act. Baldur's Gate 3 runs great in the first act and pretty well in Act 2, but Act 3 completely screws the pooch. Bugs, glitches, and all sorts of performance issues are plaguing players, who are also reporting that they've lost hours to bad saves and other problems. It's not affecting everyone, but it's affecting a lot of people. Crashes, screwed up quests, pacing issues, and more make Act 3 a real slog to get through. And I'm a little surprised that so many reviewers had given the game a 10 out of 10 with Act 3 in such rough shape. Frankly, it doesn't seem that Baldur's Gate 3 was actually ready for release, despite years spent in early access. And this was rushed out the door prior to getting the necessary polish. This is one of those situations where I'm with them, and then I slam on the brakes and I fly out the front window of the car because I forgot to wear my seatbelt. But it's
Makes
one
sense.
thing to say that there's some issues, there's some bugs, and there's performance issues in Act 3, because there absolutely is, and that's not something that I would refute, because even me, with a pretty beefy PC, have some issues in Act 3.
I think everyone has an issue with Baldur's Gate for running it more than 4 hours, that you kind of just are forced to restart it, otherwise the frame rate and performance just completely self-implodes. But, you know, everything else, I think they fixed most of it. I'm not 100% sure, but, you know, that's the word on the street.
It's a completely different thing to start a narrative in which the game is not ready for release, that it was rushed to release, in their words, and then also to try to throw salt on the wound and say, oh, well, the game was also in early access for 3 years. Well, keep in mind that early access only ever included Act 1. They didn't release Act 2 and Act 3 specifically because of the fact it would have ruined the game. It would have ruined the hype behind the game, any excitement for the players for the game's full release. Simple as that. I think a really good example of this is something like Last Epoch, where there are a ton of players that are excited to play the game once it's fully released and completed. However, the hype really isn't there for a release because the
yeah, I constantly forget that Last Epoch is not finished. Feels almost finished, though.
game is technically already done.
Yep.
Yeah, there's some other things that they need to fix and some things that they're going to add to the game, but since the game is pretty much already fully fleshed out...
Yeah, I don't... in Last Epoch, I don't see actually any, like, you know, ginormous bugs or issues that need to be fixed. I don't know.
The hype isn't there. The excitement's not there, because the game's already there. I don't think Baldur's Gate 3 would be nearly as popular as it is today if they had had early access players already playing Act 2 and Act 3.
True.
It just wouldn't be the same. Sometimes after a game is released, the narrative starts to shift over time. It's recency bias. We tend to overemphasize our current experiences while estimating how things will look in the future, especially when we're talking about a game that can hold you in Act 1 for up to 50 hours while still completely enjoying the experience, while many full-price AAA titles can't. I think it's valid to point out the issue of bugs and make players aware of issues with the game.
I mean, there's a reason every AAA dev was actually pissing their pants because of Baldur's Gate 3, because it just makes them look bad. Like, there is no other way to look at it. AAA devs from, you know, ginormous multi-billion-dollar companies are trash, and they create trash.
You can't ignore an important detail that gives this context. Many players are enjoying the game far too much to pay attention to bugs. Sure, we see them, however, it's easy to overlook issues when you're actually having fun playing the game.
Yep.
This isn't the case of something like Fallout 76 or Cyberpunk 2077 that was released in an unplayable state and therefore not an enjoyable experience.
Cyberpunk 2077 is getting better at least. But Fallout 76 is still an absolute disaster, baby. And Starfield's probably going to be as shitty of an experience.
Furthermore, player expectations for, say, a Blizzard game to be complete at $70 is different than our expectations for an independent studio that charges us $60. We know it's different.
I mean, I think a homeless bum who's, you know, doing some hard drugs is gonna have a better chance of releasing a good better gaming experience than Blizzard at this point. Like, those people aren't clueless. They literally don't even... They're not even game developers at this point. They're more like some kind of woke fanatical agenda that just wants to do random BS now.
Difficult to have the resources and the ability to comb over every single bug in a game with the amount of density that Baldur's Gate 3 has. We know that that's a much more monumental task given the size and resources available to Larian. Is there some jank in Act 3? Absolutely. And I would never refute that. There are some performance issues, there's some bugs, there's some dialogue problems, there's a couple things here and there.
Yep, makes sense.
However, the players know why those issues are there when they get to Act 3. This isn't one of those mysterious things where you're like, oh, they just must have not finished this part of the game. No, you get there and you immediately realize how busy the end of the game is. There is a lot going on. There is a lot for you to do. There's a lot for you to explore, and it's going to take you a long time to be able to get through it.
Yeah, as always. I already touched upon this, but the quick summary of this is Baldur's Gate, as any good story, is a million branching pathways with so many possibilities. And at the end, all of these pathways in a good story will collide at one point and all tie together. And that's really hard to do in something like Baldur's Gate, okay? Really incredibly hard. So, you know, if there are problems with that, it's kind of understandable, because most companies don't even attempt that, okay? Their storyline is one line, and that's it. Baldur's Gate is 100,000 lines, and they all need to converge.
Not including context or nuance when we're talking about persuading others to purchase something or not purchase something, I think is incredibly dishonest, especially when you're saying that the game has been rushed to release. And then on top of that, also talking about how, oh, well, they could have fixed it because, you know, they had it in early access for 3 years. You're not adding the context that players never played, the second and third act. You're also not talking about this is the PC version of the game. We all know that there's always some issues that need to get ironed out because so many people use all kinds of different variations of hardware when it comes to PC. Whether that's 30 series, 40 series, AMD. There's all kinds of different permutations of combinations of
4-core dual
you can have in a computer, even down to the cooling system.
Yeah.
The operating system.
Fans,
what programs
lava,
that you run on your computer while you're
Tesla
playing a video
engines,
game.
coils.
There's a lot of different things that can cause problems and issues with games. And I'm not saying that they need to break down every single part of that, but maybe also include the context of how many bugs Larian has already fixed, how fast they've been putting out hot fixes, how they've already given the community an update where they say they have a fix that's coming out with 1,000 different fixes to the game already.
I mean, they fixed the game-breaking bugs pretty much instantaneously. When a game-breaking bug was found, it's like, okay, it's gone, it's fixed, there you go.
Their first major patch. Talk about how the company is actively working on improving the game's performance.
No.
Rather than just saying, yeah, they rushed it to release. They had time.
I guess that's pretty much it. Oh, the end of the video. Anyway, that was pretty great. That was absolutely great. Oh, man. Forbes, of all things, and Holy now attacking Baldur's Gate. Legendary drops. It is what it is, boys. Anyway, this was Cruiser said. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and have a nice day. Bye-bye.